We are back for another episode of Everyday Racism, brought to you by Music Mind Matters and Believe Music. Myself, Chris. I've got two special lovely guests in here as well. We start off firstly with the very multi-talented. When I was reading through your bio, I was like, you do this and you do this and you do this. From
she does it all.
Artist, a DJ, a creative mind, if you want to say it overall. TAAHLIAH. Did I say it correctly?
Yep.
I did.
That's it, TAAHLIAH.
TAAHLIAH, how's your day going? How's everything?
Fine. I was on the train from Glasgow to London today,
wow.
which is always like, it's not an ordeal, don't get me wrong, it's fine. It's just like a very long slog, especially because everything's back to normal-ish. The trains are just so much more busier than what they used to be.
Yeah.
So I was used to just like kicking back, relaxing, like 2 seats next to me, 2 seats here. But I was just crammed full of people, which makes it hard to like work because I'm just like on a laptop like that. Everyone's going to be looking at me like she's an actual weirdo.
Yeah.
But no, that's it. And now I'm here.
And then
Happy to be
people
here.
eavesdropping as well, looking on your screen to see exactly what it is.
Yeah.
What you're up
like,
to.
all the exclusive music that I'm making.
As well as that, we've also got the lovely therapist from Black Minds Matter, Karen Carberry. I said it correctly as well.
You did. Thank
I always
you.
like making sure that I say the artist names and like the guests' names correctly.
Yeah.
Because the last thing you want to do is just have someone just completely violate and disrespect the pronunciation. How's your day been as well?
Yes, it's been a really lovely day. The sun is still out today. You know, I've been sort of had a little break for a couple of weeks and just sort of come back to work and straight back in. And now I'm in London, you know, having this wonderful meeting today as well. So
Thank you so much for taking the time, you both, for coming down. The main thing I wanted to speak today was about class barriers within the music industry. So if I say that to you specifically, how to enter into the music industry as a minority, as a Black minority, whether it may be from Black ethnic background, from an Asian ethnic background, what does that speak to you? Like, how do you both interpret that in your opinions?
I feel like with me, it's quite a complex kind of thought process to go through, because not only do I come from a working class background, not only am I Black, but I'm also queer and I'm also trans. And so they're all kind of like amalgamated into one. It's hard to like separate them. So yeah, sometimes, because when I think about perhaps the experiences that I've had or the barriers that I've faced, there is so much that goes into it more than it just being class, if that makes sense. And also growing up in Scotland, like Scotland is so white. It's so incredibly white. And so, yeah, just kind of like the experience of it all just kind of makes things a lot more complex, I guess, yeah.
100%. Karen, yourself?
well, I'm not a musician myself, but well, one, having worked with people in the music industry from both a therapeutic perspective, but also in terms of, you know, we all, perhaps most of us may know family members or friends who are involved in the music industry. You know, it can be quite a challenge. It really is something that people really love to do. And also, you know, sometimes with Black people in the music industry, they're sometimes channeled to one sort of aspect. But what I have been really interested in is also the Chiniki Orchestra, who play classical music and also classical music who are written by Black composers. So it's quite nice to see a wide range now sort of emerging as well upon the music industry. But again, it's been a hard slog, I think, really, from understanding.
Just even briefly speaking on that, Karen, I mean, obviously for yourself being a therapist, how have you seen that in such a way if these obstacles that you've noticed that people from ethnic minorities within the music industry, how has it impacted their mental health? Has it, you know, encouraged them in such a way, or has it actually affected them that they actually deal with micro or major mental health issues?
I think there is a couple of things when we think about mental health, really, because there are of course, underlying issues to people's mental health. You know, we've just got to think about COVID, haven't you? This last couple of years and people being isolated. You know, there have been sort of other aspects where people have been able to get their music out in a different way, but also being able to work in sort of in a very isolated manner. And that's been quite hard for people in the music industry. And then the other aspect of that as well is in terms of their value. And, you know, sometimes being asked to do things for free and being told it's for exposure and having to really struggle with their craft, you know, and also their vision, but also their sense of themselves and their sense of value. Are they valued enough compared to somebody else who may have an open door much more easily than them? So that's been quite hard for them, and also being able to sort of develop their confidence and being able to say no sometimes. So working with those particular clients, being able to sort of see their value and also realise that, one, they've got a choice, and also look at other options as well. And so that's been really quite positive because there's been quite a lot of initiatives over this last year. So I've seen a lot of help in terms of developing their confidence too, which helps to strengthen their mental health as well. But of course, as I said, there are those other aspects as well, because if you want to devote yourself to the craft, sometimes you can't go into an everyday workplace situation, having to make that balance as well. So it can be sort of quite difficult, and sometimes family members may not understand that about that passion in regards to being creative. And so, you know, it's really important that we think about, you know, what else can we do to support people in the music industry to, one, be able to develop their passion, two, be accepted, you know, not just by the music, but also in terms of family members and friends, that people can understand it and give it equal value, just as much as you would give equal value to someone who was going to be a lawyer or a banker. You know, music is really important. We all really use it to really relax. And so we really need to give kudos to musicians and their creative arts as well. So, yeah, so it's about educating everybody as well, I think, really, in terms of what can we do to help support musicians, artists, songwriters, in their mental health, and to really help them to, you know, to feel that they are worth something, really. I mean, there's quite a lot of things that happens, and perhaps we can talk about that a little later as well, just in terms of about imagery as well. Don't know if you 100%. Wanted to say something about that. Well, so they may want a certain look. So the music industry might want a certain look.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
You know, now we've got this wonderful movement around natural hair, and, you know, it doesn't always have to be straightened or in plaits, or, you know, there's more expression that can be accepted, whereas people would say it's not professional.
Yes.
And there also is how people look. So one, in terms of, you know, somebody who may have a fuller figure, the music industry may ask them to lose some weight. And that may then sort of possibly develop into some eating difficulties or disordered eating or eating disorders. And we see that a lot, I think, in the arts as well.
I definitely do agree with you in that sense. There was 3 key words that you mentioned in what you said, which was acceptance, support, and worth. TAAHLIAH, for yourself, do you feel like as if you have received that acceptance or that worth or support in any way?
I guess so. I guess it depends on what kind of like subsection of the industry we're talking about. I feel very, very supported by my label. I have a very great support network of friends. I guess with COVID, it's difficult because it's not as if I have had that many in real life interactions with people within the music industry because nothing's been happening apart from some of the performances that I do in the shows that I've played. But I guess, I don't know, sometimes when I look at perhaps my counterpart, who is either white or comes from a more kind of established or financial background, and I see them perhaps getting a little bit more support than what I feel that I'm getting, or just even moving within the sphere a lot easier. Sometimes I find it difficult to not just like get like complete imposter syndrome, which I do suffer from, don't get me wrong, but it's hard when you have, because the music industry is so saturated with people, you don't know whether these questions arise in your head. It was like, oh, okay, is it because I'm black? Is it my background? Is it my class background? Is it my gender? What is it? And there's so many things that kind of like come into play of it that just, I think, definitely get on top of me a lot of the time, which I find is a lot easier to cope with due to the support network that I have. But yeah, imposter syndrome's a really big thing. It's hard navigating the industry, kind of like, and not seeing anyone who looks like you, or even people before you. Like, you don't see any like artists that you can identify with on kind of like a visual level, and that there's no one, I can't think of anyone that is black and trans kind of like navigating the sphere. So then you not in just feeling alone, you're just kind of like, oh my God, what the hell am I doing? Because I've never seen anyone do it before. So like, what am I actually doing?
100%. And when you speak about the support system, was that support system set from just like friends, family, close people around you, or was it more like a support system that was, for instance, set from, I don't know, let's say a music platform or a music entity?
Oh no, definitely friends and family, and kind of like more social relationships rather than anything that has been like industry created. I found I got to know a lot of my friends and like my chosen family through going to art school. That was an experience that I think would be quite interesting to talk about in kind of like a class, through like a class lens. So I grew up in Kilmarnock in Scotland, which, for those who don't know, is a very, very working class, kind of like rough area of Scotland, west of Scotland. And I got into art school through like a widening participation scheme. And so basically what that was is that the Glasgow School of Art, the art school that I went to, kind of like certified all these schools that were like from like low income backgrounds or like not doing well or whatever, in order to gain kind of like students from those kind of schools to kind of like perhaps like fill out the divide that they were seeing. And so yeah, entering into those spaces as a working class person was so difficult, because art school in of itself is like very white, very middle class or upper class. And so when I entered into those spaces and I was in it, immediately anyone who didn't know me from before just automatically assumed that I was middle class, which was very, very difficult to kind of contend with, because I had done all this work to get into this space, and then immediately that work is invalidated because I'm in the space. That is so hard. It's so difficult, and it's not even as if anything that like I can't exactly like walk around with a badge on my shirt saying that I'm working class. You know what I mean? So I guess when you in and around those spaces, it's hard, and then it just kind of like, as soon as I graduated, I then kind of like came into the music industry, which again is just like another form of like that like big institution surrounded by like middle classness, upper level. Do you know what I mean? So again, it's like getting similar kind of experiences from what I got in art school now, with that people, because I guess I'm doing well in a sense, or that I am entering into spaces that people like me don't enter into. Immediately there is my working classness is invalidated, because how could I get into that space without any money? People don't think it's possible. Obviously it's possible because I'm there,
Of course.
but yeah.
And it's like you always got to remind people of how talented you are and that you deserve to be there.
Yeah.
And it's not like you shouldn't be eradicated because of your class.
Yeah.
And yeah, I understand exactly what you mean. I mean, one of the main things we've had through these conversations is realizing that no matter where you do go to, that there's always that hierarchy and that position of power of where the people that are in control of everything are predominantly white males. You know, just speaking back about the social support systems that are set, Karen, like, are there any main platforms or entities that we should know of specifically for Black and Asian ethnic minorities that actually help to give that support in that sense for artists or people even as execs within the music industry?
I think it's important to highlight Black Minds Matter.
Of course.
We arrived out of a need whereby, you know, so many people from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds were not able to access those supports. And even though we have been called hard to reach, in parenthesis, that in actual fact from last year, what happened was, you know, following George Floyd's murder, was that there was, and we know there was a global outcry, and because, you know, enough was enough, everybody felt it, you know, and out of that came Black Minds Matter, who wanted to provide a therapeutic support space for Black people, and there were 2,000 people immediately who were on a waiting list, and but prior to that, they had raised so much money by the community and people who wanted to support therapy for Black people suffering with all sorts of trauma from all sorts of areas as well, and industries. And so, you know, that is a very good space, I would say, for people if they want to be able to refer themselves for free therapy. And then, so said, you know, it was 2,000 people. That isn't those, they were not hard to reach at all. They were able to say, this is what we want. There are also organisations such as the Barton, which is the Black African and Asian Therapeutic Network. That's been founded by Eugene Ellis and his fantastic team, and they are in London, but they also have networks throughout the UK, just as the Black Minds Matter remit. Their clients come from throughout the UK. There isn't a catchment area. So those things are quite important as well. There's also NAFSIAT as well, which is in London. So there are quite a few organisations who are there who are accessible. And as I said, Barton have a network of therapists throughout the UK. And as I said, who would be able to support people in the music industry very well. So, you know, I've worked with many people, both, you know, not just through these other networks, but also privately as well. But I'm not saying that I need any more clients. So I think it's really important that we support these organisations, and that's why I like to be part of that as well. So there's also the UKCP. Has obviously a network of counsellors. You probably could look through to see if people self-identify, whether they are Black, Asian, minority ethnic, counsellors. You'll be able to see, who you'd want to be able to use as well. Because I think it's really important that, as I said, whether when you're in the music industry, there are always the underlying issues as well. There are also the areas in which people sometimes, unfortunately, get involved in because of sometimes the difficulties about managing the stress and the pressure. Some people succumb to depression, some people succumb to drug and alcohol, some people might succumb to sort of other sort of types of behaviour that I've talked about before in terms of eating disorders or other types of aspects where perhaps they've been manipulated perhaps through the music industry. I think that we talk a lot at the moment about the impact of abuse, both emotional, physical and sexual abuse of people in the music industry and also athletics as well. So it cuts across every field. So there are organisations who are well placed, and as I said, the Black Minds Matter have got, from my experience, they have got quite a large number of Black therapists who are able to meet people's needs. You just have to go on to the website and have a look.
Would you say that a lot of these services, because a lot of people would be interested in this, but the main thing they'll say is if it's too costly for them, are there some that are, within not so expensive or relatively free or anything along
So Black Minds Matters, their services are free. So what's fabulous about that are that clients can refer themselves, they'll get an assessment, and including the assessment, I believe it's 12 sessions that they're entitled to do, which is a really good number of free therapy. And we'll say it's free. Don't make it sound like it's free. It's valuable therapy. These are clinicians who are very experienced in their field. So once you're assessed, you are matched with somebody who has the expertise to manage the difficulties that have been presented in the assessment. I think as well in the past, people may have been given sort of two or three counsellors, and they can look on their profile and choose for themselves as well. So I think that's important as well, that people know that they've got choice.
Of course.
So those are free. With Barton, you would have to pay for your therapist, which I think as somebody who has been in private practice, it's value for money. The training is very expensive, and but for a reason, because we do tackle very difficult issues. Everybody at the moment are dealing with very complex, and I don't mean just the therapist. I mean clients are dealing with very complex areas, both in terms of the impact of COVID, losing loved ones, the impact on the economy, the impact on jobs, children away from school, identity, sexuality, a whole plethora of areas. So, the therapists that you'll be working with are people who have been in training for a very long time and care. I think that's the important thing as well to remember. Myself, who've done, many of our therapists have volunteered in different ways. I still volunteer. I volunteer in Jamaica, even in this lockdown aspect. There are, wonderful ways of giving back to the community, which is really important. And so working this way, not only be providing a service, but also giving back to the communities as well. So I'm not sure if does that answer your question?
Definitely, definitely answers the question.
You try not to stop me.
No.
Stop me, so I don't just start developing.
Honestly, we love it. Honestly, we love it. One of the main things I wanted to speak about briefly, and TAAHLIAH, you briefly discussed this, of where you mentioned about class and classism. Do you feel like as if classism and racism work hand in hand together?
Oh yeah. Oh yes, yeah, they do. again, it's kind of like the intersectionality of it all. It's kind of, if you're Black and you're working class, you're obviously, your navigation of life is obviously going to be a lot harder than whether you're Black and middle class or Black and upper class. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Would you say, for instance, if it was someone compared to them being Black and middle class, do you feel like as if there may be less obstacles they may have to face in some sense?
It depends on what kind of obstacles you mean. I guess when I can't talk from experience of being middle class, but from what I can imagine is that, at least perhaps from my own perspective, if I grew up middle class, perhaps pressure to kind of conform to a job that's going to pay very well would be a lot less. And so I think particularly with middle and upper and working class kind of backgrounds, when you're middle class or upper class, you have more freedom to kind of live less constrained, I guess, and kind of, especially with, like, say, queerness, for example. It's a lot easier to be queer when you're middle class than it is to be working class.
Elaborate on that, if you don't mind me asking.
What, elaborate on?
On that example that you gave, that it's easier to be queer middle class rather than being queer working class.
Well, I feel like stereotypically working class culture is centered around very kind of like constrained forms of gender stereotypes. And perhaps that means that when you are going out with those norms, there is more of a pressure to conform, if that makes sense. Whereas if you're middle class, and again, it's not as if like I'm middle class and I can say it from experience, but you, from what I have experienced with my middle class friends, most of the time their parents will be well educated, meaning that they will have perhaps a wider perspective on how the world works and a wider perspective on sexuality and gender identity and all those other things. The same way that they'll probably have a like more knowledge on economics or like sociology and things like that. And with that comes perhaps a better understanding of whenever your child develops kind of like queerness or strays from the rigid sort of like gender barriers or like sexuality barriers. There comes more of an understanding, I guess. I hope that answers your question.
It does.
But again, a lot of that is steeped in sort of like stereotypes, unfortunately. Like, as much as I come from a working class background, my parents are very, very accepting and very, very understanding. But I think, when you are working class, you're kind of like immersed in the culture that is so one way or the other.
It's like as if you are pretty much nurtured to think this way, and there's so many social structures that affect you physically, mentally, in all aspects. It's like you have to follow this extreme, and it's like it's obscene to go the other, if that makes sense. And it's the same with class. It's kind of like if you grow up worrying about money, or if you grow up in an environment where money worries are like a big thing, you're going to take that on whenever you are doing like your GCSE or your A levels or whatever. They could, like, speaking from personal experience, I was going to when I was picking my subjects for high school, I was going to switch out art and music for like 2 sciences, and my mum told me not to, thankfully. But I'd done that because I knew that I would perhaps not get on better in life, but I would have been able to access a job which would have had more security than compared to going into like the arts, where it's seen as like a risk to some extent. I definitely understand where you're coming from. I think one thing that I definitely want to speak to you mainly, Karen, about as well is the the misconstruction that that institutional racism doesn't exist. And this is something that we often see within the music industry, that now a lot of people would say now we've got a lot more representations of Black people, whether it may be as musicians that are doing well commercially, or there's a representations of Black people within the music industry as executives. Do you still, how would you be able to tell people that that's really not the case and institutional racism still exists?
Well, I think there's lots of discussions in the media around that, aren't they? Certainly on Instagram conversations and things like that about that actually that isn't possibly the case, because there is still the pecking order, isn't there, that you mentioned as well, that it's mostly sort of white men at the top.
Of course.
And what you want to see is the movement of that glass ceiling, in a sense, which, just to take your discussion about the fact that that middle class people may be more accepting, but is that the case? Because there is still this glass ceiling. We'll see so many people get through, like your Jay-Z's, your Beyoncé's, your other people that probably I'm not too afraid with.
Also, it's not to say that necessarily middle class people are more accepting. It's just that they have been kind of created in this situation where perhaps their knowledge on, or perhaps what they've experienced is just wider to working class people. Do you know what I mean? Like, the social and cultural references will just be a lot wider compared to the average working class person. That's not what I mean. I'm not saying that like everyone's accepting or no one's accepting at all. I'm sorry, just to clarify that.
That's fine. Yeah, because I think that's important to sort of talk that out, isn't there? Really, in terms of to say that, because, and I think I've got some books in. Overread has puts her book out recently about allyship, and she's saying just because you've got a Black friend doesn't mean that that's it, you're accepting, and you've made, there's still those boundaries that people have to still push through, and so we see people like Stormzy, got the right name?
Yes. You got it right.
Who I'm making the assumption here that he's also from a background that has not always been middle class. And what he has done, as you said, there are few and far between who you think, and yet he's doing more with it. Not more than you. I'm just saying he's doing more with it in terms of opening up avenues for other people outside of music as well as within music as well. So in a sense, breaking through the glass ceiling comes with a responsibility, and it's that. There's that pressure as well, isn't it? When you break through that the glass ceiling of, being in a goldfish bowl, what are you going to be doing with your money, like the footballers and things like, so-and-so's bought his mum a house, and so what? Those sorts of things. So there comes a lot of responsibility. The higher you go up, there's more responsibility. And so you are going to be abutting the institutionalized racism that is in those higher echelons of society, whether it is banking, music. You're going to be there. You're going to be one of only a few, unless you just with other industries, if you've got your network of people where you're going to come together for the greater good as well. So it is going to be there, because it is about, it's that craft, the vision, the intellectual property has value. Not only the person who is developing that has value, but it has value to the music industry. So, you become a bit of a commodity as well. And, we've seen it from, yesteryear with the old Motown. You can tell what age I am, can't you? From the old, you know, and the development of their craft and their music, and that music being passed over to somebody else who doesn't look like them, or having to cross over and not having their image on those, you know, all those sorts of institutional racism is still there. The other side of it, I guess, is whereby it has to be in a, you know, where it has to be in a bit of a stereotype, for example. You know, it's there are people's passion, but, you know, we want it to go more down that way rather than sort of middle of the road, or whatever that artist wants to, how they want to develop. So it's fabulous to hear how much support you're getting. I think that's really important to hear that. I think that's really important. It, you know, one of the things that I always think when I'm working with clients is to think about, you know, what has been going well, you know, those gifts, things that you're thankful for. I've got this little book over here about things that you're thankful for, to recall those things you think. So to hear you say that you're, you know, you feel really supported by your label and things like that is really important. And I think for clients out there who are struggling to get on to that level, or that belief in themselves, or the belief that people are going to support them and they're not just going to be a commodity, they will see them as who they are, a worthy person as well, is really important. So I'm really pleased to hear you say that.
That's good. That's good. But don't get me wrong, I do think that my music would be consumed a lot more if I was white. I genuinely believe that. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm very supportive and everything, but due to just the way that, like, institutional racism affects society, I do think my music would be consumed a lot more if I was white. Yeah.
What would you say? Like, elaborate on that.
I guess not wanting to, like, compare myself to other people or whatever, but when I see people in other artists on similar levels, or even just the way that I guess my art is consumed on a public sphere. So for example, like, I just got nominated for like a really big award in Scotland, the Scottish, long listed, so Scottish Album of the Year, and the press for it is.
Congrats, by the way.
Thanks. The press is running out for it just now, and there was a specific article that I read by a news establishment that I won't name, but kind of like going through all the lists, and they got quotes from artists and stuff like that, and they got images of artists that they wanted to feature, you know, the usual stuff that they would put into sort of like a press article about something like that. And there's multiple artists of color nominated. So there's 20 of us currently. In the article, all the white people did not feature one artist of color in it. No images, no mentions, no quotes, no nothing. Just when we were mentioned was at the bottom when they outlined every single album and every single artist that's been awarded. Like, that's an example of that. Do you know what I mean? It's just kind of, it's annoying and it's disheartening, but I'm also just like, at this point, I'm just like not surprised, and I find it interesting that, like, that happens, and kind of, so like, say last year at the Say Award, Nova won it, and she is a Black female rapper, based in Edinburgh. And even just perhaps looking at how people just don't expect it. Like, people just don't expect Black people to, like, be within that space and win. Like, they expect us to, like, win at mobiles or whatever. That's fine. But they don't expect us to be in those spaces. And when we do get on top, and when we do win, they're just like, so, like, they're just propelled by it, because they've not even thought about us to begin with. Do you know what I mean?
It's like as if you are grateful for even just being shortlisted or even mentioned to some extent, that when you do win, sometimes it's often met with backlash at times, of where some people have ridiculed them for the most minor and the most random of things. I remember prime example being, remember the Brit Awards, 2015 Brit Awards, when Kanye West performed, and you had a bunch of UK artists and UK black male artists on stage, and all they were doing was literally just dancing, and then it was seen as intimidating.
Oh my God,
it was seen
yeah.
as threatening, and all
Yeah.
along those lines. And it was just like, they're just dancing. There's nothing else they're doing besides from just dancing.
Yeah.
But they just have their hoods up. Some of them don't, but they're just dancing. And yet it was just ridiculed somehow, some way.
It feels like the music industry has categorized black people in a very, very specific kind of like subsection of it, and to do with like performance and music genres and stuff like that. And whenever we come out of that, everyone is just so shell shocked. Like, see the amount of people that I know are surprised at the music that I make, because I make electronic dance music and like pop music, and people don't expect black people to make that kind of music.
Of course, and that's what makes it upsetting as well, because someone like yourself and with that sound, it's like as if you are pushed to a side, because it's not catering towards the quote unquote stereotypical sounds that you think a black artist should make or would make.
Yeah, exactly. And then also it's
Right.
that thing of like, at the mobile awards and stuff like that, why is there no category for electronic music? Why is there no category for dance music? Like, do you know what I mean? Or even pop music. And it's kind of this whole, I just feel sometimes being black within these spaces just means that you're so inherently boxed in, which is just like very, very difficult.
Who's created those boxes, would you say?
I don't know, whoever the people are on
The
top.
man.
Which yeah, exactly. And it's kind of like, I don't know who creates the awards or whatever, who creates the charts, who holds the head of Spotify, or Apple Music, sorry. I feel like I shouldn't mention like actual like names, because but it's like they will give us dribs and drabs to kind of like kill us over, and then kind of like as soon as we start wanting to like come out of that, it's just kind of, again, it's like everything's just done in dribs and drabs. I feel like it's like, okay, the mobile awards, and then like, okay, there's no like electronic music or dance music category, but black people pioneered techno music. How does that work? Like how does that make any sense? And kind of when you think about like black pop stars and kind of the way that they have been placed within society compared to their white counterparts. Yeah. Even on the topic of like black pop stars or whatever, like Beyonce, for example, like she grew up in a very, very, very privileged background, like very, very extremely privileged. And I have no doubt that affected how to where she got today. Yeah.
It's funny that you do mention that, because would you say, for instance, with the middle class, like, because I feel like with a lot of black artists is that the main pursuit is to obviously be financially well off from this for yourself and your family, generations, etc. And would you say that pursuit kind of allows there to be a disproportion of black artists that are in various spaces? So it's like as if there's only space for like one or two, not a space for many, because the way that the system and the way that the music industry is set up is only like, you can only have a couple of you guys, not too many.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Like in comedy,
Yes.
you can only, and acting. You
And
can only
acting
have,
as well.
You can only, or film production.
Yeah.
You can only have only few of you can come through.
Yeah.
And I think that's important when you talk about that institutionalization and people's perspective of black people, because as well, when we think about the population, in those days they only saw people on TV. You only saw them in EastEnders, in certain roles. Certain people had certain roles, and they weren't outside of those roles as well. And so they have then a fear, I should say, and a prejudice of what they feel, as you said, black people can and can't do. So there's, not to plug, but just an example, in this book, The International Handbook of Black Community Mental Health, which talks on a broad range about the microaggressions that take place. There's in one of the chapters that I've written there's a case study that talks about this couple, the family that I worked with, and the example I gave was, if you saw, we were just talking about if they saw a group of, in fact they brought that up really. It was sort of what the impact of working with me had made for them as a family. One of those questions you don't normally ask, but you just thought. And what they had talked about was if in the past, if they'd seen a group of white young people walking, having a laugh on the street, having, the jokes and thing, they would just think they're having a laugh. If they saw a group of black boys doing the same thing, they'd think, what they up to? Yeah. And they were able to, this was to be able to say that openly in that way, and not to brag, but it was on reflection. This is how we've been thinking, and and now we've been challenged in it. So that same challenge has to take place across the music industry.
Would you say that there's various things like now of where that is celebrated to some extent, where we've seen phrases such as Black Boy Joy, or things such as, I don't know, it's just like now Black it's more celebrated. Yeah, Black Girl Magic, or things along those lines of where that is actually celebrated now. And you would say that we are now part of the quote unquote, the woke generation of now, where we're aware to everything, not just on race related, but gender, sexuality, religion, background, class, everything that now we are a lot more woke to and a lot more accepting to.
So is there something about, when we think about, I think you talked about your parents being very encouraging of you. Mm-hmm. Is there something about sort of that, these generations now, that first generation who came here, who tried to sort of find their way through? I mean, we know what they went through and the impact that they had on their mental health, and how they perhaps with their children as a result of that. And then the children now reflecting on those things and thinking, well, you can do anything, that you can be anything you want to be. Mm-hmm. And that encouraged, because that I think is really important, that we say to our children, we say to our brothers and sisters, our cousins, that we really encourage them. As I said, you can, whatever you want to do, you can be the best that you want to do. Mm-hmm. And have to take that into the workplace as well. You may only be the only person in there, but outside of that workplace there are other people doing the same thing. You have to have that network to strengthen your inner resolve and your mindset and your well-being, really, to move through the glass ceiling, to be able to show people that, and even those people who write, get somebody else to write something. Mm-hmm. You don't have to wait for somebody to, as you said, give you that kudos, because you know about that yourself, and that now we have, writers, we have journalists who can also write. We have independent people, just as, for example, we've got this here. We've got this, what's it called? It's the Coco Boy, I think it's called, and the Coco Girl. So this magazine, and the one for women, or for girls, I should say, the two boys, came out last year as a result of the founder looking for pictures, looking for pictures or magazines in the summer holidays that represents her daughter, and there wasn't one, so they made their own. And that was just a year ago, and it has gone. It's not even just in the UK, it's in the States, it's in Africa.
Oh wow, amazing.
Yeah, so there's something about helping our children grow up seeing people who look like them, who can do whatever they want to do and succeed in it.
Definitely, definitely. It sounds like something I need to get my hands on as well, to be fair.
I think just the perspectives on everything are just changing.
100%.
Do you know what I mean? It's kind of, when you think about the way people lived, 30, 50 years ago. How long ago was 30 years ago? What was that?
30 years ago we're talking
not
about.
even 70.
Was that the 90s?
That is
1980s.
1980s. Yeah.
1980s.
The 90s.
Yeah,
That's
the 90s.
mad.
Yeah, you would say the 90s. now.
Even just like what, like I watching films from that period of time and listening to how people talk and just kind of like what would be said, what's acceptable in film and music and through the arts, and just the way that like society has moved so not necessarily fast, but when you think of like that shift between like in 30 years, like what our society has became today, like that really is quite it is quite something, and that is what makes me excited about the future, is that if we can, even just the way attitudes were in like 2010 for example, and how things are now, what are things going to be like in 5-10 years time? And like, yeah, there is a lot of work to be done, but I mean, like, we need to like at least focus on some positivity.
100%.
But yeah, I think it's inevitable at the end of the day. Society moves on, society becomes more intelligent on things, and we just become so innately more aware. Do you know what I mean? Like, even when you think about the progression of like the internet or whatever, we have everything at our fingertips. We can find out information that perhaps wasn't accessible to us 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And all these things kind of like add to the development of knowledge and acceptance, and kind of like, okay, you don't understand how race works, Google it.
Yeah.
Google it. You can Google it. Do you know what I mean? You couldn't do that 30 years ago. I'm not saying Google's going to fix racism, but it's a step in the right direction. Do you know what I mean?
100%.
And just kind of like, just conversations are like being made, like stuff like this is happening. Do you know?
I think one of the key things we mentioned, bringing it back, we mentioned earlier on, and just still sticking with what you said about the progression in society, is how vocal people are now about the good and bad of this musical journey, or their journey within the music industry as a whole. Would you say that there's some forms of pressures that people have had that there's been on artists or execs of them breaking into the music industry? And if so, how has it affected their mental health as well?
I think particularly if you're a woman going into it, or if you're femme identifying, there is so much more. There's just added pressure to like, compared to like if you're more masculine identifying, do you know what I mean? And like, as you said before, like body image and kind of like availability, and like all these things just come into it when you think about the way the press was years ago, and just kind of the way that female artists in the limelight would just get picked apart. There's a lot of pressure in the music industry. The music industry is so hard. It's really hard. And like, don't get me wrong, I'm in a very privileged position, and I don't take one day for granted at all. But it's very hard, and like, people don't understand. People look at kind of like, I guess, the glamour of it, or the glamorization that has been made on it. But working in the background, it is incredibly difficult, and it's not like a 9-to-5 or whatever. And in that, I think because a lot of people live their life in like a very structured way, they kind of see the arts as not that. They see it as like this like invalid form of a career, which it obviously isn't. And that again has a lot to do with class. Yeah,
100%. Karen, have you heard prime examples of where the pursuit of chasing a dream within the music industry that has affected artists or music execs' mental health as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Because as is mentioned before, being able to trying to make the balance between having the time to develop their craft and being able to give over to that, because it is, as you said, it's not a 9-to-5 job. A lot of things happen in the evening too. There is also, there is the imagery. There's the expense of keeping up the imagery. So a lot of people need to do that. Or if they're going to a specific area and they've got a hairdresser who can't do their hair, they have to do their own hair or something like that. So there's that additional part of it, juxtaposed with having to earn an income to pay their bills and all those things that we expect people to do as well. So there's a real pull and a pressure in terms of wanting to chase the dream, and having that belief in themselves. And I mentioned before about, this thing about exposure sometimes. So having to deliver your craft for free, and in actual fact, it's not for free because it costs the artist. It costs the artist to travel to the venue, to do their clothes, do their hair, and to perform, and also to then make sure what happens with their music when they've made some music, and I don't know if that's the right term.
You're good. Good doing good, Karen. Don't worry. You're doing it.
Made some music, and then it is then on somebody's platform. What happens to their intellectual property? Will they get anything from it? And those sort of how is it used?
Of course.
Then how you said there's all of that while they're chasing that dream, and trying to do it. Just with any job, you really do develop and grow as you really give yourself over to your vision and your craft. And then there's these other things that you have to manage as well. So, I like to sort of do some factual things with people in terms of, what are things that they can manage and have got, have mastery over. As I said, it's really important that people feel that that they do have some choice, that they do have some mastery over things, and not just their development of their music, but just in terms of themselves as well, looking after their own personal and physical health as well, and seeing what they want to do, in terms of how they will move forward. And that might mean, as I said, thankfully, this last year, there's been lots of initiatives that people can look for, and then that's really helpful in terms of if they have managed to get a grant or something, or been paid for an event or something, that then builds up the confidence as well, and it helps them. So it's those important things. And also, as I said, in terms of helping people to know that they are worthy, that they are worthy, they are worth it. This is really, really important. People's self-worth is so important to really build people up in that way, and not in a false or fake way, but in a way that people can identify those aspects of themselves that are of value and of worth as well. So those are really good building blocks, I think, really.
100%.
And also about putting boundaries around. How do you put boundaries around when you may be being manipulated, juxtaposed to, could this be the time? Could it be this time? But feeling that you'll be able to practice putting those boundaries around, and feeling good about it, and being able to be flexible as well. And those things take practice, don't they, really?
100%.
It's part of you developing your character, part of developing your negotiation skills, and also holding on to your own sense of worth and value as well.
100%.
Yeah.
I think just to piggyback off of what you were saying about kind of like payment and exposure and things like that. Over the summer, a very, very big festival asked for me to play at their festival, which I did, but it wasn't paid. And the heart-wrenching thing about that is that this whole kind of like idea of like payment through exposure, really at the end of the day it's just to take advantage of artists.
Of course.
And
people are coming to see you.
Exactly. And it's kind of like the people who are going to be most affected by that are working class artists, because okay, you're wanting to book them to play this huge festival. Are you going to pay travel? No. Are you going to pay accommodation? No. So like, how on earth is that artist meant to is meant to afford that. Do you know what I mean?
Very true.
And also, if we're going to talk about, like, I guess one thought that I had was kind of like when you're entering the music industry and kind of looking at the differences between working class or middle and upper class, and that when, say, a label is coming to you with a contract and wants to sign you, if you're middle class, your chances of gaining access to a lawyer to look over that contract, or even to get anyone to look over any kind of like formal paperwork that you might sign to get your foot in the door or whatever, is so much more higher than a working class person. So a working class artist could sign that contract, and I don't know it. And it's like, it's a dead end contract. It's an awful contract, which means that then their career is just get going back 10 steps.
Makes sense.
And it's just like loads of little things that I think not a lot of people think about, that just then build on to this kind of like complete eradication of working classness in the arts. Yeah.
I think
I was just thinking, just sort of because I think this is very important, conversation. So I was just thinking about there's the, if you're writing a song, it's a poem, isn't it? Right?
Not my songs.
Okay. So you say, for example, you're writing a poem and it's published, you're an author.
correct.
So you can join the Society of Authors. I can't remember how much it is, maybe about £70 or something like that. You join the Society of Authors, and then when you get a contract for anything else, they will look over your contract for you.
Okay.
And give you some advice. You don't have to take it, but give you some advice. And then the second thing about that is also in terms of the arts as well, is there's another organisation. It's dropped my mind now. It was here in a minute. It's just gone. The ALCS, Authors Licensing Society. So what they do, they take they collect, I should say, secondary rights for authors. I'm not sure if it's all musicians. I think they have somebody they will forward the organisation's details to if you write to them, who also will collect secondary rights and distribute them. So do have a look on their sites as well, ALCS.
Yeah, I think musicians have something similar in that we have the Musicians Union, but even just like gaining access to that or finding out about it is like a difficult thing. Yeah. And when you think about kind of like PPL or PRS, I still have no idea. I have no idea. Like literally, I just let like my manager deals with that. Like I genuinely have no idea, and it annoys me that I don't know about it, or at least the jargon that is used is just like not very accessible.
But I don't think it's just working class people, because when I've shared this information with well-established authors and of middle class, they've never heard of the ALCS before.
Yeah.
And then they've gone through, contacted them, or just gone online, put all their books in, and they've collected the money that ALCR has been collecting them for 40 years.
Yeah, I think a lot with these organisations and these entities is that it's either through experience or through recommendation.
Yeah.
Knowing about the
it was a white middle class person who told me about it. I had to tell you just through
Exactly.
conversation. So it's good to share. It's good to talk. It's good to uplift people by letting them know this information as
100%. Before we do conclude, what will be like the one gem that you want to give the listeners, the viewers, to end up taking from this, of like your views and opinions on class and racism in general?
Oh,
could be anything. It could be the most random of things, but just something that means a lot to you, that would be like a gem you would want people to take from this.
I guess keep going, because it's not impossible, and it might feel impossible, but it's not impossible. So keep going.
Yeah. And I like the fluidity of class in actual fact. How you self-define, it's up to you.
Yeah, that's very
it's
true.
up to you.
Yeah.
Somebody can ascribe you as working class, And depending what you decide, where you're going to be and how you're going to navigate your life or children, partners, etc., that it's fluid. And you will find when you're talking to middle class white people, they haven't always come from a middle class background.
Yeah.
Very true.
Yeah.
Very
So class can be fluid, I think.
Yeah.
I'd say a big thank you both for coming down and having such a insightful and also just like a calm conversation as well. Usually with something like this, it'd either be very heavy hitting or very hard, but it's like as if it's been great to understand from both perspectives. Karen, how can people stay in contact with you or Black Minds Matter as well?
So Black Minds Matter have their website, just on Google it. Instagram, they're on Instagram as well, Black Minds Matter, and it'll come up. And the other thing that's important is because we are wanting to keep this organisation going, and what they have is the 21,000 challenge. So they're looking at 21,000 people who are going to even just put £5 a month towards Black Minds Matter so that people can continue to access their service and to keep the organisation going. So please just go online.
100%. And TAAHLIAH, yourself?
Just my artist name is TAAHLIAH, TAAHLIAH. You can listen to my music. Instagram is aka TAAHLIAH. Twitter is TAAHLIAH. Yeah, pretty simple. Hope you like the songs. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you so much. Another episode of Everyday Racism. Thank you once again.